Coming to you live from a cabin deep in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. Turn down the lights, get yourself a drink, and let's settle in for tonight's broadcast. Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Mysteries. Here are your hosts.
Hey, welcome back to Midnight Mysteries, everyone. My name is Nathan, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Michael.
Tonight, we have a guest in person with us, and we're going to be covering the supernatural side of the paranormal. As always, if you want to learn more about these kind of topics like ghosts, haunted houses, haunted artifacts, and more, click that subscribe button. For our inspiration for tonight's episode, we look at the full moon this past Sunday in February, otherwise known as the bone moon. And I had a chance to look up what the other name for the full moon is just a second ago, but I completely forgot. It was called the bone moon by many First Nations groups because of the food shortages and starvations that would occur near the end of the winter season. It's also called the bone moon based around its mythology and folklore regarding Wendigo and Wendigo psychosis, which we do another episode about. But one of the other big theories surrounding full moons is its impact on paranormal activity. And we all know that, supposedly the full moon has an impact on haunted houses and possessions and crime, etc. But is there any science to back that up? We go through a bit of the science in our Wendigo episode too, but we're just going to touch on it here for a minute. There is a 2021 study that says nearly 81% of mental health professionals believe the full moon can make people ill. And that's from a paper in the National Library of Medicine and on PubMed called The Psychiatric Presentations During All Four Phases of the Lunar Cycle. And in it goes to a number of police departments and fire response teams and other emergency response workers who talk about the perceived impact of the full moon on the population. And we've all heard, must be a full moon tonight because people are acting crazy. But there seems to be some truth to that. There's another paper on the National Library of Medicine, again, PubMed, called The Circadian Rhythm Disruption in Mental Health, which specifically talks about the increase in schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and more. And in fact, we get the term lunacy or lunatic from the word luna or moon. So, Mike, why don't we go into who our special guest is for tonight and the relevance to this issue?
Yeah, tonight our guest is Ehren Ackerman. Former paranormal investigator turned consultant, Ehren is no stranger to all things some might consider odd. He has been on over 70 paranormal investigations, collects oddities and haunted artifacts, works at a cemetery, is the resident paranormal expert at the Strathcona County Museum and Archives, and has spoken with thousands of people about their own personal paranormal experiences. In the past, he's been featured in newspapers and magazines such as the Globe and Mail and Cottage Life, and made a couple appearances on local TV, television, and radio broadcasts. When he isn't doing paranormal-related things, he is also an avid volunteer, a caring father, and a loving husband. Welcome, Ehren.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you came straight from work to this, right afterwards. Are you feeling pretty wiped?
It was quite the hike. Yeah.
How long of a drive was you?
Oh, well, it's quite the hike. I can't disclose the location, but it definitely is.
That's
it's
right.
quite the hike out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plan ahead.
It's quite the drive to our cabin too, right?
Yeah,
so add that into the mix. And you work at a graveyard, is that correct?
I do, yes.
And what do you do at the graveyard, and how long have you worked there?
Worked there for just a little under a year now. But yeah, I'm a groundskeeper there.
Cool. And does that involve, trimming around graves or helping dig up graves or anything like that? Or is that a separate team?
It's a little bit of everything. So yeah, I do everything from the landscaping and the actual groundskeeping of everything all the way to the services and burials. So yeah.
Okay. Oh, and do a lot of people kind of transition in and out of that job, or is it pretty steady?
Oddly enough, it's pretty steady. Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of the people seem to be very long timers, and that
Yeah.
was actually one of the things that attracted me to it.
Well,
Yeah.
that's good.
Nice.
Going back to the beginning, the very, very beginning of your life, in terms of your upbringing, was there the belief in spirituality or the paranormal in your family? What did that look like? Did your parents or grandparents ever talk about it with you?
That's really interesting, actually, because yeah, like I come from a background with a father who is quite academic, so double
Okay.
doctorate, very smart man, a lot of respect for him, and my mother who is a little bit more of the open-minded, agnostic type. So I did kind of get a little exposed to spirituality, but not really any religion or any of that kind of thing.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but I did have some family members, like my, I guess, great aunt. She was really interested, and my grandfather actually opened up later in his life about his paranormal stuff.
Oh,
So I
okay.
did end up hearing some stories from family members later on.
Oh, interesting. What kind of paranormal stories were they if they're not private?
Oh yeah, no. So my, I guess, grandfather, he had some premonitions happen when he was in the war, stationed overseas,
Oh,
and so
interesting.
yeah, he opened up after I started a group, and it just kind of, I don't know, it connected us a little bit more. So later on, he shared a little bit more about that. But yeah, it was more, yeah, he'd be able to go into a place and actually,
Oh,
see,
wow.
he had felt like he'd been there before, or
Oh,
was able to kind
interesting.
of direct people. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, cool. So for you personally, I guess, just given that there wasn't that much exposure through your parents, what was your red pill moment, or what was the experience that made you go, there has to be more than this? What took it from your mom's, like, I guess, agnostic curiosity to you, being part of the paranormal clubs you are and speaking about the paranormal, etc.?
Yeah, I had my own experiences, and that was kind of the way it went down. I remember, I was trying to think of like where I would have some sort of original first memory of this, and like, yeah, it's like I have a few original memories that I can think of, right? Like, so I always had dreams, like very vivid
Okay.
dreams that just stuck with me. I don't know how to describe it, but they
Yeah.
imprinted quite heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on in life, I learned a little bit more about, like, shadow people and things like that. So I kind of started realizing that there was a world to what I was seeing.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I just kind of had that happen throughout my life. And then we built our own Ouija board when I was a kid. I was thinking about that.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So I was laughing a little bit about that. I'm like, I bet you that may have had something to do with it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so you opened that can of worms. So what do you think about Ouija boards?
Honestly, I think they're a tool. I think
Yeah.
anything in the wrong hands is pretty much dangerous, and that's just kind of the way to describe it, right? Like the right
Okay.
people using it is very interesting and fun, and then the wrong people using it, it can go bad very quickly. So,
Right.
Yeah.
little discretion.
Yeah, I've actually been surprised at at how many people, even outside of religion, are against Ouija boards, just because of the reasons you described, where they don't necessarily know who's on the other end of the phone line, right? And so yeah, that can get pretty freaky if you're not, if you don't know what you're doing or don't know what you're messing with overall. How did you come across the paranormal in other people's lives? Like you've gone through people's houses, you've done investigations. I guess what got you started in those areas?
Oh, those areas. I actually remember I heard a story. So I was driving Zamboni. And that was what I did
Nice.
in high school. That was my high school job. And like most of the job was sitting and having coffee at the
Yeah.
concession
Nice.
stand, right? Like waiting for the, all the.
So
I guess-
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was the games end and all that. So it's
I like how your career was like Zamboni driver to graveyard worker.
Yeah, I had quite the spectrum, actually. Yeah.
Oiler Zamboni driver didn't work for you, so
Yeah, I just kept trying
graveyard
something.
was
Something
next on
sticks
your list.
eventually, right? But I do remember a guy telling me a story, and that was like, it was one of the newer areas of Sherwood Park, actually, oddly enough. And
Okay.
yeah, he told me a full-on story about like something that had happened to him, and like the goosebumps went up on my arm, and I remember hearing that, and I wanted to hear more stories.
Yeah.
That was 100% what I wanted to do, just hear more.
Yeah, it's interesting knowing what everybody's, I guess, red pill moment is, and for some people it's just like it's always been part of their life,
Yeah.
and for other people there's a memory that's burned in, and it's interesting that part of yours were dreams. Now, in terms of your years as an expert and researcher in the paranormal field, and as we're talking about the investigations you've got involved with, is there one story or one investigation that sticks out to you most?
I do remember the very first time I met somebody that I would probably consider possessed. And that was probably the only one I've actually run into in all of that I've been looking.
Yeah.
And that one, I do remember it. And if I got a little bit of time, I could share the story. 'Cause,
Yeah,
it
please
was-
dive into it.
Yeah, we were fairly new to the investigative. I'd only probably been on 6 or 7 investigations by then, so we were just kind of getting our feet wet and figuring out the equipment and all that. And we got a call from a person who is, we weren't sure if they were mentally ill or if they were actually going through something. And I think that was the kind of, we decided she was in enough despair to try to help, to try to go in and see at least. And I do remember when she answered the door, that was my first moment that I thought I was staring at a corpse.
Okay.
Oh, freaky.
I had never described anything like it, but I do remember, like, you know, when I don't know if anybody's been to a viewing or something like that, but usually when you see like somebody passed away, you're looking at their chest to see if they're breathing.
Yeah.
And I remember fixating at that, like the entire time I was there. Like, you know, you're just like, is she alive? And it blew my mind. And like, yeah, it did get a little bit, because I remember we were trying to help, and her entire house was covered with like drawings she had drawn, and it was of demons ripping her apart, and of all these like, it was horrifying things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we did end up, I got a call from her a little while like after, and I remember she was crying, and I was like, well, you know what, I'll go over and help. And that was kind of my idea. And as she was going through, she was just hysterical, and I was trying to get her to calm down and tell her I was going to be on my way. And she all of a sudden went dead calm, like calm. And I remember her going, "We're okay now." And there was 2 voices, and like, I'm getting goosebumps, right? Like, and it was a male voice and a female voice at the same time.
Yeah.
And I can still hear it. And like, that's where I realized that there was something way deeper going on here than what I was ready for, right? Like that was, yeah.
And there's been a few cases that have gone all the way to court in terms of exorcisms, and there being evidence presented on both sides where, you know, there's times where it's very clear that these people should not know the languages they're speaking out in, right? And then there's other times where they know details about people's lives, and then you kind of have to wonder if there's a blend between, I mean, we don't wonder personally. We believe there's a blend between, you know, the supernatural and physical world, right? So not all mental illness has overlap with the supernatural, but we do believe that a lot of the mental illness we see in terms of schizophrenia, et cetera, have, you know, layers on top of them. And Mike, I remember one point you were researching schizophrenia, and I think I learned about this in my psych class too, but it's something like 9 out of 10 schizophrenia diagnoses have had ritualistic abuse.
No, that was multiple personality disorder.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean,
MPD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it was a completely secular study. Like, it wasn't done by a religious group or anything, and it was 8 or 9 out of 10 people that struggle with that were ritualistically abused.
Wow.
Which is really, like, I mean, that's a very strong correlation, right? Like borderline causation, right? So yeah, it was really interesting why that would be. But that's the thing, right? With mental health, there's so many times where I've been like, is this mental health or is this more of a spiritual thing going on? It's really hard. I don't have the answer. Right?
Yeah. And sometimes I don't know what your opinions on this would be, but I think something we've seen before in some of our episodes is that love healthcare, love mental health awareness, et cetera. But sometimes it seems like certain prescriptions more just bury the issue instead of dealing with it outright. And, you know, some of the times people go through inner healing or trauma healing, they can eventually come off those medications on advice of their doctor. And if you're on any of those medications, this is not us advocating for you to stop taking them, but it is interesting to note that sometimes when people go through that spiritual healing, there is the tapering off of some of that medication in their lives. So I think that is more evidence that, you know, it could be interlinked.
Yeah.
We got a comment here saying that your story gave them goosebumps, gave them chills.
Good, me too.
So
Yeah.
us as well. And
so I just, you know, you're talking about going to this house and hearing the 2 voices overlaid, and how that was kind of like, okay, whoa, like this is no longer like cute and funny, it's like something's going on here, right?
Yeah.
So like where, I mean, I'm assuming it's been a process over many years, but what do you think that was? Like, what do you think? You mentioned possessed, so do you think that was demonic, or what is that? What do you think that is?
Over the years, I would have said, like, when I was back in my earlier days, I probably would have had an answer for you.
Yeah.
Whereas now that I've been doing it for as long as I have more questions than
Yeah.
answers. And I do find that, like, I think there's such a spectrum of things going on to each individual case that one I probably would actually have classified as a possession, which I think is a very, very rare thing for even priests or exorcists to go through, right? Like that's and we did hand it off to, that's what it was. It did end up with a spiritual advisor as well as a doctor at the same time. So that's very interesting. The comorbidity issue is very...
Yeah, and we start getting into things like Wendigo psychosis and the difference between Wendigo and Wendigo, right? And there's the belief of even possession there too. But when we look at something like UFO abductees or experiencers, some of these people that have had these encounters end up writing books full of binary, and when the binary is translated, it leads to like these obscure crop circle locations, and just again part of that knowledge that they shouldn't really have. And I like your answer to the more you explored these areas, the more you go, okay,
Wait a minute.
we don't know what we don't know, right? And Mike and I first started off this radio show as a chance for him and I to talk about some of the areas we've spent hours and hours and hours on, and then we quickly got to the point where we're like, we're in by no means expert in very many fields at all, so we need to start bringing on guests. So we can head to our next question, which ties in. But I imagine if working at a graveyard doesn't spook you, nothing much will. With working at a graveyard, have you or your team ever encountered something otherworldly, or have you heard of some of your coworkers' stories regarding something they've encountered?
Yeah, like I can't really speak for the company for sure, but I mean, like, I like to believe that the cemeteries and graveyards are quite peaceful places typically. That's kind of what I find. Like, being the paranormal investigator and everything that I've been, I have had less experiences at cemeteries than pretty much anywhere else on Earth. So that's pretty, I don't know. But I did have one, actually, when I started here, and it was an interesting story because I'm a little bit of a detailed dude. I take things to heart, right? I'm a very emotional guy sometimes, right? So we forgot to put up a wreath one time when I was closing a service, right? So I went back after work after we had locked the gate, and I drove around because I totally just was spaced in a hurry, whatever. I came back and I set it up. And so I was out in the middle of a field. I had actually walked out to where this grave was, and I sat down and I was kneeling, and I was just kind of like propping up these flowers and prepping, just making the grave look a little prettier in case the family decided to come back and see. And I literally heard, "Can I help you?" And it sounded like a male standing right there. I thought the family had come back to grieve or do whatever they were going to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, I thought I was interrupting, so I stood up to go, sorry, I'm just here fixing it. Like, there was nobody there, and my car was like 200 yards away, like nobody anywhere near me, and I'm in the middle of an empty field.
Wow.
It blew my mind, and that was like, it was one of my first kind of like experiences at work, and I realized that there may be something here and it was so helpful. Can I help you? It wasn't like evil or anything. It was just trying to help, right? Like, not or help. I don't know. Maybe it wanted me to help. I'm happy.
I laughed when you first started sharing that, because I'm just imagining you like partially stepping on the grave and whatever voice you heard sarcastically going like, "Can I help you?"
Right? Yeah,
standing on the resting point.
That's kind of what I felt like. Like, I was intruding a bit, and I did not mean to.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had one story from one of our listeners where they were all at a graveyard late at night, and there was a group of them, and somebody heard a sound, and so they all got spooked and started running. And the one girlfriend, it says here, jumped over a grave, and her foot sunk down about 6 inches, and the boyfriend had to go and stick his hand in and pull her foot out for them to get out of there. And I won't ask if they went back and made sure that was covered, because they probably ticked off one of your coworkers in a different country who saw that giant footprint in the sunken grave there.
Man.
But thanks for sharing that story. Appreciate it.
Well, okay, so that kind of brings a question for me, and this isn't meant to be judgmental towards anyone, but I know that there's, some people, do like nighttime visits to cemeteries to try and see if they can, see paranormal activity and stuff like that. Does that bother you, or do you think there's an issue with that, or you think it's totally fine? Like, do you have an opinion on that?
Like, from my personal perspective, like, I get such enjoyment out of cemeteries and graveyards that I would hope that others are enjoying it as much. Like, that's what it's there for, is kind of the living to enjoy.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, as long as they're being respectful. 'Cause,
Yeah.
I mean, like, you can be disrespectful during the day or at night. It doesn't really matter. And I
Right.
kind of feel like that's the important
That's the
thing
important
more
part.
than the actual. 'Cause, I mean, you go out there and you ask questions. You're trying to do something. You're just being curious, right?
Yep.
Like, versus trying to stir up something or cause issues.
Right.
Like, yeah, it's just being respectful is the
Yeah.
important thing, really,
Yeah.
out of all of it.
Totally. Now, with your interest in hosting the paranormal area at the Strathcona County Museum and Archives, I guess I have two questions for you. You collect haunted artifacts. How did you ever get involved in collecting haunted artifacts? And two, what on earth made you think that was a good idea?
Well, okay, so the haunted artifacts, like the original actual haunted part of that started coming because, like, I collect oddities, right? That was
Okay.
my thing. I really liked having the weird stuff. Like, if it makes you kind of go, "Bleh," that's what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like to hold, right? Like, I want to touch it. So the idea is I kind of just started collecting that. And then local groups here, and a friend of mine, Wayne, actually, he got in touch with me about some stuff. And it ended up, like, it was something he had that he thought was, like, he believed it was haunted, and, like, or he knew about it. And he got me in touch. And I started I guess I took it home. and that was kind of the start of my haunted kind of part. Like, I mean, before I had always confiscated something here.
Okay.
Like, and by confiscated, I mean, they donated it to me. I didn't ask
Right.
for it, but it was like,
Opened up a
yeah, I didn't
casket.
steal
and-
stuff, right? But yeah, no, it was more like, like a family would have a Ouija board or something like that, and they didn't want it in the house anymore.
Sure.
So
Okay.
it ends up
Okay.
at my house, and that's
Right.
kind of the way that works, and it sits and collects dust in the basement, right?
Yeah.
Like, it just is what it is.
In the
right?
basement, of course.
Yeah, right. So, like, I started by that stuff, right? And then, like, yeah, I just started giving haunted artifacts a safe place to be.
Sure.
So that's kind of how that ended up.
So with these collection of artifacts, do you ever see, any type of encounters with them? Do you have any activity surrounding them? Has it ever spooked you out? Have you ever gotten rid of one because of activity with it? What does that look like?
It would take a lot for me to get rid of it because
Okay.
I'm such an encouragement of this kind of thing. I like to think that everything lives peacefully at my house. It's welcome to exist. It was totally happy to be there if that's the case. Like, it's my house is a safe place for living and dead. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
But as for the artifacts, I know they all had crazy haunted stories that I do believe a lot of, like when they arrived, but I haven't had any. And that's
Okay.
kind of been the trick. Like, I have the normal stuff at my house that we've always kind of had. Like, my wife knows we got a ghost cat.
Okay.
Like, I've seen it, she's seen it. Everybody just kind of tripped over this ghost cat that runs around our house. It's my grandma's house before ours.
Okay.
She saw it, like, it's like
Really?
long before, so this just has been there. Right, so like,
Have you
new
named
stuff-
it, or did
No,
it tell
not
you its
really,
name?
yeah.
Or
it gets fleeting, right? So I haven't gotten to know it all that well. Like, every now and then I try petting it and I just forget it's not a real cat. Yeah, but like that kind of stuff, right? So we've always had it. Yeah, right. But I've never, I try not to encourage too much like crazy activity stuff. But I mean, like I said, if it wanted to show itself, it's more than welcome to. I'm not going to hinder it, that's for sure.
Okay.
But everything seems to exist peacefully, which is nice.
Okay. So you say, and I'm just throwing it out there, you're saying anything's kind of welcome to exist there. So where do you kind of draw the line? Like, what about like evil spirits or
Yes.
things like that?
That's the trick. Like, yeah, like me personally, I don't really have an evil, like good evil thing in me. Like, I
Okay.
don't really believe in it.
Okay.
And I mean, like, it kind of does stem from one case that I had, but it was more like I kind of realized that what was there one time was a monster for sure, but it was protecting from a monster.
Okay.
So once I realized that like you don't call in like, you know, a little child innocent to protect from something evil. That's just not what you do, right? So I stopped trying to affect it and I started just observing.
Okay.
And I think that was kind of the idea. So like, yeah, it seems like I don't know what happens on the other side, and the less I kind of mess with it and just observe, the more it just kind of everything's peaceful and it does its thing. I feel like the more I try to, you know, imprint myself on it, it's like I don't know any better and they get ticked and whatever, and it just seems like more backlash than anything else.
Well, it's interesting because I think we may have talked about this on the episodes, or maybe it was just in our conversations, Nathan, but you know, we've talked about how a lot of people have this perspective that they have power over like spirits, and you know, that we believe that the spirit world is far more larger and more advanced, or whatever you want to call it, than ours, right? And so it's like, it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of people go into places and challenge spirits and try and, you know, mess around with things, you know, trying to contact demons on Ouija boards or whatever, and you know, like that's dangerous, you know. So it's interesting to hear you say that it's like you took a step back to observe more than trying to
interact
or
yeah.
Well, like I always kind of like believe that, like, let's say a horse died 5,000 years ago, right? It was a horse when it died, like new horse things, right? Give it 5,000 years of learning, is it a horse anymore?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
You know?
that's an interesting perspective.
So like it's kind of given enough time and the ability to continually learn, it's going to sound way smarter than us. It's going to know way more than us, and it's going to be able to do things that we were never able to do yet.
Yeah.
I can't say I've ever come across a story of like a sentient horse talking to somebody in a paranormal encounter, but I mean, you even look at biblically Balaam's donkey, right? At one point, the angel opens its mouth and it starts talking, and you know, you have to wonder if there's some sort of blend of, you know, spirituality or dimensional overlap there. And I think with animism, which is the belief that objects or plants or animals can have souls, that, you know, sometimes there's things that can cause division when being around. But I don't know if it's often what the movies depict. And I'd love your opinion on this, but I think sometimes, you know, with haunted objects in movies, whether it's a mask or whatever, things get like violent and crazy and walls start bleeding, etc. But sometimes I wonder if it's more subtle than that too. Like maybe there's a escalation of division within a marriage. Like it becomes very argumentative, or a lot of strife, or, you know, more sickness, etc. Yeah, health issues. Have you ever brought an object into your home and experienced anything like that, more on a subtle level, or been to anybody's house where they're like, you know, there's been an unusual amount of, you know, confrontation between us?
That definitely has something. Yeah, it does drive wedges, right? And that's usually the idea. From what I understand of like most possession cases, it's a slow process. You know, it started way before anybody really realized it. It was always like a long, drawn out isolation.
Yeah,
like
some sort of open door from earlier on. And
yeah, I mean, everybody's curious and whatever, but I mean, that's kind of the thing, is like, when does it become an obsession? Or maybe you're predisposed to it, or maybe it was, you know, there's a combination, because I mean, I'm sure there's lots of different ways to do it, right? Like,
I think we both definitely think that it's, you know, there's both predisposition to it, and at the same time you can open doors too. I mean, we look at sometimes these things are generational, right? They happen because it happened to your mother and her mother and her mother, and then there's other times where it's like you're either messing around with something you shouldn't be, or something happens to you and it opens a door in your life. So I definitely agree with you that it could be one of either. We've got some human skulls here. Do you want to talk a bit about them?
Sure. I collect human skulls. I got these long before I worked at a cemetery. Just saying that. Totally
We won't
legally
ask
acquired.
her.
Yeah,
right?
we won't ask where or how or
No, they're my totally legally acquired. This is these are my skulls. Part of my oddities thing, right? Like there's everybody's kind of into stuff, right? Like so some guys are into, like serial killer stuff, some guys are into human remains. I'm one of the human remains guys, right? I like the human skulls. So up at the front there, you got Norma, who's stage left or stage right, I guess, camera left.
right here, the one.
Other one, there you go.
Oh,
Yeah,
this
that's
one?
the older
Okay.
one. So yeah, that's Norma. She's my first.
Yeah.
So I'd never actually held it.
She's your first.
She's my first. She's my first. Yeah.
And did you name her? Or
I did
she
name
come
her.
with
Yeah,
a
that
name?
one.
Okay.
Yeah. They didn't come with names, so and they come with various
And they never
ideas
told
of
you?
stories, right?
Yeah.
I wish that'd be nice.
Yeah.
I did watch TV with one time just because I never was sure if they'd ever seen it.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, outside of that, like I like to give them an experience every now and then, right? But yeah, so she's my oldest. She's my first. I bought her like from a collector here, a local guy, and yeah, it was totally. He's the first one I ever held. She's the first one I ever held. I didn't hold her until I had actually bought her.
Yeah.
You said locally here?
Yeah,
Oh, that's pretty cool.
yeah, you can buy this stuff locally. It's actually not that hard. They're a little expensive, and trading and buying and selling, but there's
Yeah.
quite a culture around it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Can I ask you how much they usually go for?
It really depends on the quality and quantity. Like each various one. Like if you get one that's medical quality with any sort of crazy work done on it, it can be up to $2,400, $5,000.
Okay.
Wow.
Right. And other ones I bought, like the one that's cut up there, that would have been a child or a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, but it's kept for medical purposes. So
Right.
it was actually, hence it has the sinus cut out and all that. So it was actually kept to be studied. And
Interesting.
that one I got from an antique mall.
So,
So
if I were ever, we all die eventually, but if I'm dead and I'm ever spectating, if my skull happens to be auctioned off and somebody's like, 200 or 300, I'm going to be so disappointed. Why did the one prior to me go for like $5,000? And yeah, this one actually reminds me of I assume it's okay that I.
Oh, yeah,
okay. The Masons have one of their next level initiations is drinking wine out of a skull too. So that's what it reminds me of.
that's actually the reason why I bought it, because I didn't want somebody doing that. I figured that was pretty much the first thing a
Save
frat
it.
guy would do, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, and again, if I see that happening to my skull, I'm going to be so ticked off.
Right. Well, that's the perks of us. Like most collectors, every collector I've ever met, super respectful people and really just want to like take care of it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
and share the knowledge. So like obviously that one was meant to teach. It will be like I let people hold them. Like
Awesome.
we teach. That's the idea, right?
Yeah, and sorry, does this one have a name?
No, I didn't give that one a name yet. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. This one over here, this one's Norman. So that one's Norma, and this one's Norman. So there's Norma and Norman. And then this one's damaged, obviously, so I picked it up.
Right.
But I mean, like, yeah, it's, missing half of it, right? So these are just things that, like, you kind of run into along the way, and I like to take care of things. So I put them in, they got a safe place at my house, and they will actually be given to a museum or a collector. I have 2 people in line that if anything happens to me, they end up being taken care of for life.
Okay.
So
That's awesome. Cool.
succession
Yeah,
plan.
we have a skull as part of our intro video too. And it's totally real. It's not made by me at all with random supplies.
Well, you know a guy now, so
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe
there we
for your
go.
season,
We
next
could
season,
swap
so we
it
can-
out. Yeah. Cool. What is your oldest artifact?
The oldest artifact actually probably is Norma up there. She's anywhere,
Okay.
she's upwards of 200 to 300.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah, she's
That's
an
pretty
older
cool.
one. The other ones are all a little bit newer, but yeah, that one's
Yeah.
definitely the older one out of all of them.
Okay.
And then I also do have a pair of Bali mirrors. Yeah, so
I don't know what that is.
it's kind of interesting. So like they're from 1800s, and they used to be windows. And this is actually the artifact that Wayne got in touch with me about, because he had this mirror. And that's
Yeah.
what it is. And it used to be shutters on the outside of a hut in Bali, and that was the idea. I didn't know it until I researched it. He gave it to me because it was all haunted and stuff. But I ended up finding a twin. So I have a pair of them.
Oh.
Interesting. What's what are some of your other artifacts and their unusual stories behind them, or how you acquired them?
Most of them were through paranormal people. Like, they've heard about me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess this is kind of how they heard about me. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
But like, you guys heard about me. So this is how it works, right? Like, it's kind of a word of mouth thing.
Yeah.
And it's just been That's it. Like it's been paranormal investigators
Cool.
or people
Just
who are afraid of
networking,
their
eh?
artifacts, right? So a lot of times, like I've gotten like small jewelry, knickknacks, things, all the way to like religious like items and
Okay.
things that people didn't want or believed were evil or had things attached to them. Were all the way to that. And
Yeah.
so I ended up with just quite a large amount. And then like my regular oddity collecting, right? Like that's kind of what I assume is like I've tried psychometry with a few groups and stuff with the skulls, and that's the idea, right? You just hand it to somebody and tell me what do you think, right? And like
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to figure out because like if you know some sort of
This feels like a skull.
yeah, right. Like, but most like people who know something about it can say it's male, female. Like you
Right.
can.
Interesting.
Oh,
But
okay.
most average people
There's a
don't.
sense
right?
to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they just wouldn't know, so they'd hold it, and you can tell if they're figuring it out or not, right?
Right. Cool.
So coming back to the paranormal investigation stuff, you don't do that anymore. Is that correct?
It's complicated. No,
It's complicated.
I don't run a paranormal group anymore. I am not an active member of any sort of like large team.
Okay.
That's kind of my thing. But yeah, I am the kind of resident go-to for the Strathcona County Museum and Archives.
Cool.
And then at the same time, I do my own stuff. So like if somebody needs a consultant or they run into a case that they just don't feel experienced enough, or they'll call me. They always seem to find me, and that's kind of so I kind of put people in touch and network
Okay.
and stuff. But yeah, I don't really run a group anymore. If that's the or
Is there a reason you kind of took that direction, or is it just
well,
circumstances?
yeah, I was
or-
going through a divorce at the time, so I figured that was probably not the greatest like
Okay.
mindset to be in while you're chasing ghosts and demons and stuff. So
Well,
it's
that's
kind
a
of like
healthy perspective. I would say a lot
You'd
of people
think,
don't
right?
put that thought into,
Right.
into something like that. So
Yeah, and it wasn't like, it just, I had to take time for me and I stepped back. And then, like, later on in life, me and my best friend, we stayed in touch and we kept going. So, like, yeah, Darian and me, we do abandoned houses and all that. Like, we do
Okay.
photography
Yeah.
and, like, that's
Nice.
kind of stopped doing the ghost stuff so much and started going to the locations for
Okay.
the history
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And then the ghost stuff, it just comes up now because we're there.
Right. Yeah.
Passionate about it, right?
It's just a bonus, right?
Yeah, it's not the reason we go. It's just an added bonus. Yeah.
Okay. Good. And so your involvement then at the Strathcona, I'm mind blanking here.
Museum and archives.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is that a official position or like affiliation? Like how does that work with the paranormal stuff? in
Yeah,
them?
they've got a really good team. We actually, when I was with my paranormal group, we investigated it.
Okay.
And prior to us investigating it, it wasn't known in Edmonton for being haunted. So I kind of like to get a little bit of kudos for like,
Yeah.
like
nice.
coining one, right? But
Yeah.
we investigated it, and it was later on in life I touched base with them to get involved with the history because I was actually investigating the Wendigo. That was
Okay.
so how we ended up getting in touch, right? So yeah, it was interesting. So like I ended up looking at that, and I wanted to get in touch with them, see if they had any sort of like local lore or any of that. And then I ended up volunteering for the board, and then I ended up volunteering there. And the team there is amazing. They're they're a young crowd of like really go-getters, and they're not about proving or disproving paranormal, but they're about documenting folklore or experiences.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Right, so they're totally the go-to, and they have a file that you can just and they'll put your experience in there and share it with people when people go in to ask, right?
Cool.
And that's kind
That's
of
really cool.
curate it, right?
Yeah, I appreciate groups like that just because Mike and I are quite thrilled too. We've had people challenge us on episodes before, but we've kept like APA and Chicago style citations, university level citations for the facts and stories and references we make. So I love when groups, try and be as objective as possible. And that's not to say these other groups that go into people's homes to, help them, et cetera, have to do that. But when you're putting yourself out there to the public and claiming these things, I think there should be a bit of a background or should be a bit of a procedure that you follow. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Oh, absolutely. And whether or not the experience is actually happening, it's happening to that person, right?
Exactly.
So you are playing with people's welfare, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
you got to take that seriously a little bit, which is good. And I do like the documentation. That's huge. I feel like even in my younger days, right? Like we were watching TV and we were mimicking what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
reality, it's just not that. It's
No.
like talking to yourself in the dark for 8 hours and you feel like an idiot, right? And then eventually you kind of get something, you get excited about it, and then you're kind of caught in the world as it is, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
but you don't look outside of it. Like I was saying, I thought ghosts were this little in the box spirituality, this is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And then like the more I delve into it, it's like it's not even, I didn't even scratch the surface, didn't even come close. 70 investigations later, I have way less to know.
Yeah.
And we've talked, I don't remember if we did this on an episode or if it was just one of our conversations, but even, looking at quantum physics and Einstein talking about echoes left over of somebody's, because we all vibrate on an atomic level. And so could it be echoes of somebody that once existed and people are witnessing that? Or could it be the spirit? Or could it be, something else pretending to be a spirit? And it seems to be, there's a long list of answers. And then beyond that, we don't know, again, what we don't know, right? I like how you talked about how, regardless of whether something somebody is experiencing is actually, supernatural or paranormal, it's real to them. And there's a fear or anxiety level to it. And you're there to help kind of quell that. And we've seen that before. We've even seen before where it wasn't, in our opinion, it wasn't real, but because there was such a focus on it for them, it ended up becoming real. It almost seems like you even partially referenced this earlier, that when somebody's intentions are so focused on something, it can almost draw that, right? So that, that's pretty interesting. Mike, any other questions?
Oh, it's just, fascinating history you have of going, different from your upbringing all the way to where you are now. You've learned and you've unlearned, or you've learned and you've learned that there's a lot more to learn, I should say. And, I fully agree with you on that. It's like the more you hear from people and the more you do these things, the more questions you have.
Oh yeah, people changed everything for me. Like I started the group to hear stories.
Yeah.
That's what it was. We met once a month, and then we started meeting twice a month, and we just had coffee and shared ghost stories.
Yeah.
And that was my favorite thing to do. I just loved it. It was just a bunch of honest people sharing stories, and I heard so many things. Like I even heard, I guess, one person who had like a little bit of a love affair with a haunted.
Interesting.
And I thought that was like, it's just the full spectrum of experiences people have had, but everybody's had the experience of some kind.
Yeah.
So there's something there, and I really just wanted to hear it. And like the only reason why I investigated was because a group of people from that wanted to go investigate. And I figured, well, I'm the only one who's actually been on any investigation, so maybe somebody should be watching them while they do this, right? Yeah. That was kind of like, we just kind of got together as a group, and they became really good friends. Like we did a really good thing, but it was the hearing the stories. That's what I wanted to do.
I won't even go into paranormal romances because that could really go down the rabbit hole very quickly. And at one point, is it like necrophilia? And,
you said you wouldn't go down that.
Yeah.
Hey, here we go.
That's so,
call you Alice.
Very typical of me. Yeah, we often have said, don't go so far down the rabbit hole that you lose track of the light, right? Mm-hmm. Has there ever been an investigation you turned down because you got a bad sense of it, or anything you've kind of stayed away from because you felt it was just a bit too dark or too intense?
I'm totally the guy who runs straight into the dark stuff. Always have been, unfortunately, and sometimes it gets me in a lot of trouble, and sometimes it's a good thing. There have been times where we've had to turn down a case because of physical safety.
Okay.
So like there was a knife collector.
Okay.
Yeah.
We walk around in the dark. And it just is what it is. That's just a safety issue,
Stabby.
Right? Like, really wanted to help, just couldn't, right?
Yes.
And then like I don't know how deep and dark you guys really like to get on the show, but it was like there have been a couple that emotionally hit you.
Yeah.
Right. And those ones, they still stick with you. Like they really do. They've been kind of the hardships, right? Because it's just reality. It's real life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Would you be comfortable sharing one of those at all?
Yeah, as long as you guys are okay with like a little bit of a deeper, darker one. But yeah, there was.
We've put content warnings on our episodes before, and yeah.
Perfect. All right. Okay. We did one investigation. It's the reason why I thought Greaseball was a little bit. It was in the Greaseball neighborhood back when they had the older homes in there, and I had actually, like, I didn't share much earlier, but I'd learned from a medium how to become a medium. So I was actually kind of like learning how to do it. And so I went to this case and I was kind of like reading the house, right, and doing my walkthroughs and just kind of, I didn't know anything about the house. And this is actually the one where I said the monster protects from a monster. So I was walking around and I couldn't get anything. Like I knew there was a guy on, I guess we got called in by the girlfriend, and the guy in the relationship had been getting like beaten up, like scratched, burned, kicked, dragged, thrown across the room. Like it
Yeah.
was, and like he had the bruises to show it, and like there was the scratch marks, and like I never actually saw the scratching, so of course I cannot say that that was what it was, but you could see the look on his face that it was like something was
Yeah.
happening to him that he didn't understand,
Yeah.
and I was there to help him. I was going through everything, and I was furious at a certain point because I was taking it so personally. There was kids involved, like there was 7 kids in the house. It was chaos, and I was running around the house trying to figure it out, and I finally just like I swore, and I just kind of threw down, and I looked over, and I realized the locks were all on the outside of the doors. And then I realized that like I kind of got flashes all of a sudden. I started crying, and I just got flashes, and it was like children's underwear.
Yeah.
Right. And then we did end up kind of calling, I guess, some people because we had questions, right? And like all that, and kind of fessed up to it. And they did arrest him
Okay.
and all that. But yeah, that one got hit because like it was hard. Like I didn't have kids at the time. I do now. Right. But it was.
That hits so different after becoming a parent. We're
Well,
both parents too.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm still going through my early mediumship. I didn't know what I was seeing was real or not. You know what I mean? Like I was still like questioning myself and like, is this actually whatever? And like to accuse somebody of that.
Yeah.
Like you have to like, even if I'm 100% sure, that's a weird situation to be
Totally.
in, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, that's stuff they don't talk about when you're doing your paranormal groups, right? Like that's the stuff you're gonna run into.
Right.
Is like hoarding disorder and mental illness and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
real life serious dark
Sexual
stuff.
abuse and everything else.
Yeah,
too.
like demons and dark things aren't there for good reasons, right? And that's
Yeah.
where I said like whatever was there was pure evil.
Yeah.
It was protecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had I gone in and removed it,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In our realms, we have something called intercessors, which is, people will pray and then they'll get these senses or images or even dreams and stuff. And there's been a few times where people have been praying over a situation and there's been clear imagery too that they're like, okay, this needs to be handled. This needs to be tackled. And we've even had people call the police too before, just as an intervention service. So yeah, thank you for your heart for helping people and for wanting to go into the darkness to, just try and meet people where we're at. It feels very genuine on your part. We've met some people, like this is our first time meeting you, but we've met some people before where it's more of a gimmick or entertainment hobby for them. And yeah, thank you for being willing to step up to help people.
yeah, well, I appreciate you guys doing this. And like I said, like somebody helped me. That's the only reason why I did it, right? Like people have helped me along the way, and like that's not 100% why I do. I just do it because it's the right thing. But I mean, like like I said, we're all out here helping each other. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for thinking of me and inviting me because this has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, and we've already talked a little bit about some collaborative stuff in the future, possibly involving, I won't say anything on there in case I got the information wrong. But yeah, we'd love
He's done that before.
to chat with you. We'd love to chat with you more about that. And if Mike, you don't have any more questions, we'll close up for the night. Ehren, again, thank you for coming on, for sharing your experiences with us. And that about wraps up our time for today. We went over, some haunted artifact history and how Ehren got into that. We went over, what it looks like to run headfirst into the darkness, like Ehren said, has gotten him in trouble before, but has also been a good thing before.
Looking up helps
confront
sometimes,
it. And yeah, we've kind of talked about just haunted, paranormal stuff in nature in general. Have you ever had a ghostly encounter before? We would love for you to tell us about it. Comment below or send us a message, and we'll see you next time here on Midnight Mysteries Radio.